Hello, Adam here, MidPointe's Digital and Special Collections Archivist. Today, I will be talking about Women's Army Corps veteran, former Lakota High School teacher, and local historian Virginia Shewalter. I will be discussing Virginia's life, specifically focusing on her service in World War II. For a more in-depth look at Virginia's life and her time in the Women's Army Corps, be sure to visit the Virginia Shewalter's Letters collection, available on the MidPointe Digital Archives. Virginia Shewalter was born on July 14, 1916, in Dayton, Ohio, the second of three daughters born to John and Mabel Shewalter. At a young age, the Shewalter family moved to Gano, Ohio, a small community in the southern part of what is now Westchester Township. Virginia graduated from Union Township High School, and then in 1938 she received her Bachelor of Science in Education from Miami University, Oxford. From 1938 to 1942, Virginia taught home economics at Sharonville High School. On December 7, 1941, everything changed for Virginia and the United States as Pearl Harbor was bombed. On December 8, 1941, the United States officially declared war on the Empire of Japan. On December 11, 1941, Nazi Germany declared war on the United States. With the stage set, the United States began its war mobilization. As a part of this effort, the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps was created on May 15, 1942. Oveta Culp-Hobby, chief of the Women's Interest Section in the Public Relations Bureau at the War Department, was selected as the first director. The WAAC was created to provide a way for women to officially aid in the United States Army, as the women who aided the Army in World War I did not have official status, which left them on their own to obtain food and quarters, left them bereft of legal protection and medical care, and denied them access to disability and pension benefits. When the WAAC was created, it was established to work with the U.S. Army for the purpose of making available to the national defense the knowledge, skill, and special training of the women of the nation. Women officers were not allowed to command men. On July 3, 1943, the WAAC was converted into the regular Army, becoming the Women's Army Corps, or the WAC. The Waac was now a part of the Army, rather than merely serving with it. Waac service women now had the full protection in case of capture and benefits in the case of injury accorded to men who served. All women of the WAAC were given the option of joining the Army as a member of the Waac or to return to civilian life. 75% of all women of the WAAC enlisted in the Waac. On November 8, 1942, Virginia left to join the WAAC, traveling primarily by train, first to Chicago, then to Des Moines, Iowa. When Virginia signed up for the WAAC, applicants had to be U.S. citizens between the ages of 21 and 45 with no dependents, be at least 5 feet tall, and weigh 100 pounds or more. Over 35,000 women from all over the country applied for less than 1,000 anticipated positions. Once at Fort Des Moines, Virginia partook in basic training, which lasted 4 weeks. She was then assigned to the Bakers and Cooks School. B&Cs were responsible for preparing meals and running the mess hall, which made food for 450 people at a time. After finishing B&C school on February 2, 1943, Virginia applied for Officer Candidate School. She didn't immediately tell her parents about entering the school because, to quote her, "I thought I wouldn't let you know at first. Then, if I didn't make it, no one would be disappointed." In the first week, 2 girls had already failed out. In mid-March of 1943, Virginia graduated from OC school and was made 3rd officer. She was then assigned as company officer in Regiment 1 in OC school. On March 30th, Virginia was assigned her own platoon, making her responsible for watching over and drilling the platoon while they trained for 6 weeks. After 6 weeks, she would start the process over again with a new platoon. She was also responsible for screening out members of the class who weren't up to grade. On May 20th, 1943, Virginia left Fort Des Moines and was assigned to Fort Devens, located outside of Ayers, Massachusetts. At Fort Devens, Virginia was assigned as the Mess and Supply Officer. Upon her transfer to Fort Devens, Virginia was told that she might be assigned to an overseas unit. On June 21st, 1943, it was confirmed that she would be going overseas. While considered an honor, especially to join one of the first units to go over, Virginia was slightly apathetic, worried about the impact it would have on her mother. With the WAAC becoming the Waac, Virginia technically needed to be readmitted. In order to do so, Virginia had to have a chest x-ray taken, and as a part of joining the Army, Virginia was made a second lieutenant. On September 4th, 1943, Virginia made her way across the Atlantic to England. After arriving, she was stationed in Stone, Staffordshire. On October 31st, 1943, Virginia relocated to Teddington, a town, now suburb, 11 miles southwest of London. In Teddington, Virginia and her troops were assigned to work with the Air Force. As a second lieutenant, Virginia was responsible for overseeing the women she was in charge of. This meant she kept track of the supplies they needed, requisitioning new supplies when needed, keeping military discipline, and serving as the unit's censor. Additionally, as an officer, Virginia was responsible for building and maintaining Army and Waac friendship and Anglo-American relationships. Outside of her official duties, Virginia is generally censored from sharing in her letters. She was afforded time off on weekends when she wasn't acting as active as duty officer. She occasionally used this time off to travel, making a handful of trips to London. On October 16, 1943, on a October 16, 1943 day trip to London, she met Hugh Delargy, a future British member of Parliament. From February 19th to February 25th, 1944, Virginia enjoyed her first leave since arriving at Fort Des Moines. She spent the leave traveling in nearby Scotland. On May 16, 1944, Virginia was promoted to first lieutenant. On August 24, 1944, Virginia left Teddington, sailing across the English Channel and heading to Granville to set up the Waac department. After arriving in Granville, she returned to Teddington and came back by plane on September 1st. In early September, the Waac detachment moved to Saint-Germain-en-Laye, located just north of Paris, where they set up shop. As first lieutenant, Virginia's responsibilities were much the same as before, but with the added responsibility of having her own officers to watch over. She was now without the presence of Captain Nelson, who she had served under since Fort Devens. From April 10th to April 18th, 1944, Virginia went on her second leave, traveling this time to the French Riviera. On her leave, she visited Cannes, Monte Carlo, and Nice. While in Monte Carlo, she mentioned seeing and hearing the war going on in Italy. On May 8th, the Allies emerged victorious in Europe, and Virginia joins the celebration by going to Paris, which she describes as being very crowded. On July 1st, 1945, Virginia is promoted to captain. Despite the war being over and censorship being lifted, Virginia is still responsible for her detachment. Virginia remains in France until mid-August 1945, when she makes a few Waac-related trips back and forth from Germany. From September 10th to September 18th, Virginia takes her last leave, this time in Switzerland. The trip differs from Virginia's other leaves, as this trip is planned and scheduled by the Army due to Switzerland's neutrality. Previously, Virginia was free to mostly do as she pleased while on her trips. Additionally, the Swiss refused to accept payment in US dollars, so those visiting had to use Swiss francs supplied to them, which were limited, or barter with the locals. By the end of September, Virginia is on her way home, arriving in New York on October 14, 1945. She spends the next couple of weeks traveling back, visiting family and the family of military friends on the way home. After the war, Virginia worked at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. In 1957, she left to work in the personnel department of the VA hospital in Cincinnati. In 1959, she returned to the teaching profession, teaching English at the Lakota High School until 1965, when she retired due to arthritis. After teaching, Virginia became very involved in local history. She wrote The History of Gannett, published in 1973, and The History of Union Township, Butler County, Ohio, published posthumously in 1979. On October 29, 1978, Virginia died after having battled arthritis since 1956. And that concludes my presentation on Virginia Shewalter. Thank you, and see you next time.